Welcome everyone to this session under the title AI and Our Voices, Unlocking Potential and Challenging Biases. First, my name is Rawa Oje. I'm a journalist, and a lot of journalists either enjoy it secretly without telling their bosses or don't enjoy it at all. Personally, I do tell my bosses when I use AI because we are encouraged to use AI. I use it technically a lot. To be honest, I'm sorry if you became friends with ChatGPT, but I'm not impressed with ChatGPT as a friend or as a source of information. I find a lot of information are outdated, and but technically, for the technical issues, I do use it a lot. What we're going to talk about here today is not really how technically we can use AI. It's more about our voices as women in AI. We saw a lot of videos, a lot of reports about how the biases in the AI are against people of color, marginalized minorities, but definitely a lot about women and a lot about our women in the digital Arabic space, especially that we do not know up until now how much it is developed and how it is developing in Arabic language. I have with me amazing guests with very different backgrounds and very different experiences. So they will bring us a lot of different angles and different solutions. And maybe for the younger generation or even the older generation who's looking for a shift in career, this panel is going to be interesting for you in terms of prospects. First, welcome with me Aya Jaff. She is an author, entrepreneur, named one of Forbes 30 under 30 list. She will tell us why she dropped out of the tech world and became a critic of a system she was part of building, unfortunately. Sorry. Ruwaida Al-Arabi, founder of She Checks in Libya, the first feminist platform in the Arab region. She will tell us what made her build She Checks and will highlight all the biases she spotted and will tell us about solutions that are still needed in the Arab world. Ms. Samar Younes, founder of Samar Ritual. She is a quantum cultural architect developing transcultural frameworks through Samar Ritual. We will ask her first what this actually means before she tells us more about how we can fix it, or how we can fix AI, I'm sorry. Nadine Wahba, Associate Director at the Access to Knowledge for Development Center at the American University of Cairo, AUC. She will tell us about the Feminist AI project and why there is a big need for it. First, we would like to start with the personal stories with you, Aya. If you can guide us from your own personal experience, what you spotted when you were in the tech world, when you were coding, when you were building a part of the teams, obviously there's only not one team, one of the teams that were building AI. What made you drop out and what made you become vocal about it?
I'm so happy I get to be here. I'm from Germany, so my journey started in Germany. And unfortunately, I was very, very young when I started coding. I did not understand all the power dynamics, and I was all wrapped up in that, well, I would call it fairy tale, that these tech giants and these tech founders and the magazines and also Forbes, Fortune, and all those media outlets are pushing onto us, onto the next generation. And I was looking up to people like Mark Zuckerberg when I was 15, or like Elizabeth Holmes. That did not take a good ending. But these people were basically my heroes, and I was trying to copy their steps. So I learned how to code, and I learned how to trade, and I did both of these things at the same time. I was basically someone that was a CTO for 5 years for a social stock market game, and these 5 years really laid the groundwork for how I understood the tech and finance world through a lens that was very privileged. I was in rooms with a lot of VCs, a lot of investors. I was in rooms with founders who were looking up to these people. And I later, like a couple of years later, I was also like trying to found my own startup. I say try, but I actually founded it. And we were in rooms, in boardrooms, where millions of dollars were like discussed. I will tell you just very, very shortly what this startup was about and why it made me drop out. I was working on an AI. I had a co-founder. It was an AI for journalists. Basically, you could ask that AI a very specific question, a very niche question, if you want to say, about the specific thing or topic that you're working on. And then you would get a podcast specifically for you every day in your inbox. For 15 minutes straight, there would be 2 fictional characters talking about your topics and everything that was new. And I was testing that AI, and I asked it a bunch of questions, of course, also on Palestine, Israel. This was all before 7th of October. And I realized these answers were very, very biased, wrong, and also pushing the narrative into a different direction than I wanted it to go. And I realized that I don't want to push this out, but we were so far and so deep into the development of it that the investors made me choose. They were like, either you do it or we're going to find another person to do it. And that was the moment where my world basically cracked. I was like, hold up. I thought I'm a founder. I thought I can decide where I can take things. I thought I can really make a difference here. And I was heartbroken. I was talking to my co-founder who was ready to cut the cords with me. He was like, no, I want to push this out. And then he said, yeah, you can be part of the solution later when you're a millionaire, a gigabillionaire, and we sell this idea. I was like, that's not how I want to become rich, and that's not how I want to solve things. And then I intended to push some alternatives, right? I was like, hey, there are some ways we can make this AI better, have better answers. We can have better data workers. We can treat them better, pay them better, and we can make sure that the AI is trained on data that is actually a bit more reliable. That would take us 3 more months. Those 3 months were not given to me just because of how far and how much profit is centralized in this system. It's like either it's now or never. And it's much like this canon that we all know of, like this mantra of go fast and break things. I believe we've all heard of it. And literally the meeting where I was let go of, I say let go of. When I say let go of, I said no. That was the investors telling me, hey, either you go fast and break things or you're not the leader we want you to be. And that was the moment I was like, I can't. I don't want to be part of this anymore. This feels like complicity. This feels like we're pushing a tool to journalists that is not reliable at all. And I remember I was wondering, oh, how are they going to combat this? Like these big tech firms, OpenAI and Google and such. Because back then there was no answer for that yet. Like OpenAI wasn't as big. And now I realize that was literally what they pushed out. They just pushed out this software, as you said, with all the flaws, with no corrections. And I was like, okay, this is how it works. And I need to talk about it transparently because the world where I come from, those things are not being discussed openly. And I need to talk about it. And that's what my second book is also about. It's called Broligarchy, Tech Bros and Oligarchy, and talking about all things concerning tech, AI, and how it's also part of war.
But do you feel that the decisions were purely driven by money, or was their ideology also behind it, or they just don't care about whatever ideology they're pushing or narratives they're pushing?
That's such an interesting question, because when I started really researching what this ideology really is about, I stumbled upon a lot of people that thought this is just right-wing propaganda. Like we see Donald Trump, right, cozying up to all these tech CEOs, and we think, okay, this is taking an authoritarian course. But what I realized is that those tech leaders are neither left nor really right. And that is why Elon Musk and Donald Trump parted ways, but they're cyber libertarians. Like, this is a very own ideology, and it deserves also a book on its own because it's so deep. It's such a mixture of a lot of things. But where the right-wing people and those tech bros really unite is when they both say, we are against state controls. We are against the state. And that's where they cozy up and they stay together. But those tech bros don't really know what they want to build. They basically just want to be freed from rules and freed from everything that really contains them in any way. So it was very interesting for me to dive deeper into what those tech bros want.
I'll get back to you a lot about this idea of no regulation, the world of no regulation that they want to build. But about regulation, that takes us to Ruwaida with sheet checks. Of course, you do not have the power of states, but you do have the tools to at least bring out reports that maybe would open the eyes of states for more regulations. In sheet checks, what were your findings? What are the problems we are facing online? And why is it sheet checks, not let's check?
في البداية دعيني أخبرك بأنني أفهم سؤالك ولكنني سأجيب بالعربي.
أوكي.
طبعا مشروع شي تشيك بدأ نهاية عام 2022. أذكر بأننا كنا نعمل كصحفيات مستقلات، أنا والزميلة أسماء الغزالي والزميلة سلمى الكوافي، وهما صحفيتان تعملان كمدققات معلومات ضمن منصات إقليمية ومحلية داخل وخارج ليبيا. فأذكر بأننا استضفنا ادعاء، هذا الادعاء كان لصورة مفبركة لصحفية ليبية مرفق معها أيضا معلومات مضللة ترتبط بهذه الصحفية. بطبيعة الحال كوننا صحفيات مستقلات، أول شيء قمنا بفعله هو أننا تواصلنا مع المؤسسات التي نتبع لها، وهي مؤسسات تشتغل في مجال الفاكت تشيكينج. هذه المؤسسات مع الأسف الشديد اعتبرت أن هذا الخبر أو هذا الادعاء عفوا هو محلي جدا ولا يستحق التغطية، علما بأن يعني أنا أذكر أن الشير على هذا المنشور تجاوز 20,000 في ذلك الوقت، وهو عدد مهول بالنسبة لجمهور ليبي. يعني نحن كلنا على بعض 7 مليون، عدد الليبيين 7 مليون، فأن تجدي منشور عليه 20,000 شير، يعني هذا عدد هائل من التفاعلات. ففي ذلك الوقت بدأنا نركز مع هذه المنصات التي نعمل معها، هي في الحقيقة تتجاوز العمل على الادعاءات المضللة التي ترتبط بالنساء، خاصة لدينا في ليبيا. نحن لدينا يمكن 6 منصات تدقيق معلومات كانت تتجاوز العمل على الادعاءات التي ترتبط بالنساء، نظرا لكون النساء في المجتمع الليبي يمثلن ما يمكن أن نقول أنه تابو. فلماذا نقحم أنفسنا في تفنيد ادعاءات ترتبط بالنساء؟ دعونا نعمل على السياسة، نشتغل على السياسة، الأحداث الاجتماعية، ونتجاوز هذه الادعاءات. فمن هنا انطلقت فكرة شي تشيكس، واكتشفنا لاحقاً عدم وجود منصات تدقيق معلومات ليس فقط في الوطن العربي ولكن في العالم تشتغل في مجال الجندر ديسانفورميشن، وهي المعلومات المضللة المبنية على النوع الاجتماعي. فهذا مثل تحدي بالنسبة لنا أن نكون أول منصة تدقيق معلومات في العالم تشتغل في مجال الفاكت تشيكينج المبني على النوع الاجتماعي. بعد ذلك بقليل، بعد أن بدأنا مشروع حياة تتحقق والذي كان عبارة عن فكرة محلية ترتبط بالجمهور الليبي، بدأنا نلحظ بأن هناك دعوات أو لنقل يعني رسائل تصلنا على الصفحة من ناشطات صحفيات نسويات من مناطق متعددة يرغبن بأن يكون يعني جزء من هذا المشروع. فبطبيعة الحال يعني نحن لم نستطع تجاوز ذلك، يعني هذه الرغبة في أن يكون هذا العدد الهائل من الصحفيات. أنا أذكر صحفيات من فلسطين، صحفيات من سوريا، صحفيات من تونس، من المغرب. فأذكر في ذلك الوقت بأننا قلنا لما لا يصبح هذا المشروع إقليمي طالما لا توجد منصات تدقيق معلومات نسوية في المنطقة وفي العالم. فهو تحدي صعب. ولماذا شي تشيكس؟ وليس let's check، لأن هناك العديد من منصات تدقيق المعلومات في العالم العربي. تقريبا هناك 45 منصة تدقيق معلومات في الوطن العربي، ولكن لا توجد منصات تدقيق معلومات نسوية.
هل تعملون على تدقيق محتوى الذكاء الاصطناعي فيما يخص النساء في المنطقة؟
بالتأكيد بطبيعة الحال يعني. وأنا كما ذكرت يعني كانت إحدى الأسباب التي دفعتنا لتأسيس منصة هي تتحقق هو صورة مفبركة فبركت بواسطة تقنيات التزييف العميق. فهذا كان أحد الأسباب الذي دفعنا لذلك. وأذكر بأن تزامن انطلاق منصة هي تتحقق كان أيضا مع استخدام أداة ميدجورني نهاية عام 2022. أصبح هناك جمهور عربي، مستخدمين عرب يستخدمون هذه الأداة بكثرة. طبعا الآن أصبح من السهل جدا تعديل صورة لامرأة بواسطة الذكاء الاصطناعي. هناك تطبيقات موجودة عبر الإنترنت، موجودة عبر المتاجر الخاصة بتطبيقات الهواتف الذكية، تمكنك من أن تعمل على تعديل صورة بشكل سهل جدا. يعني في ثواني يمكنك أن تدخل صورة امرأة وهي ترتدي لباس محتشم، ثم يتم إعادة توليد هذه الصورة وهي عارية. وهذا أذكر بأنه صادفنا حين قمنا بإنتاج تقرير يرتبط بتصاعد استخدام تقنيات الذكاء الاصطناعي وتحديدا التزييف العميق ضد النساء في المنطقة العربية. وهو تقرير إقليمي على فكرة، تم بالتعاون مع الشبكة العربية للمجتمع المدني النسوي. أذكر بأننا رصدنا وجود أداة، هذه الأداة كان يتم مشاركتها في العديد من المجموعات العربية، وكانت مختصة تحديدا بجعل النساء عاريات. أنت تدخل الصورة فيتم إعادة توليد الصورة. على فكرة كانت تبدو واقعية جدا، يعني الأمر كان صادم. يعني أنا أذكر أننا قمنا بتوليد الصور نساء غير حقيقيات وأدخلناها، قمنا بتجربة الأداة وكانت تخرج لنا هذه الصور بشكل واقعي جدا. هذه الأدوات كانت تستخدم لابتزاز النساء في مجتمعات محافظة مثل مجتمعاتنا. وأنا أتحدث مثلا عن سياقي الليبي، وهو سياق حساس جدا. ولا أعلم يعني إن كان لديكم فكرة عنه. مجرد صورة يتم تعديلها لتظهر امرأة وهي ترتدي تنورة قصيرة يمكن أن يمثل إساءة لدينا هنا في المجتمع الليبي، لدينا في المجتمع الليبي.
وطبعا ما زالت يعني في بعض الدول العربية تقتل النساء بسبب ذلك. نادين وهبة, before we talk solutions and prospects and go back to necessity of regulations and rules, we are still in the part where we're dissecting the problems. Ruwaida just talked about deepfake. Aya talked about the money-driven ideology behind all this that doesn't, let's break things and we can fix later if we ever fix it. So, Nadine, from your research, can you tell us about the inequalities you faced by women within our region's digital economy?
Thank you so much, Rawa. I wanted to start off by saying that I'm honored and very humbled to be here among such a fantastic community and panelists. Please bear with me. I'm originally an economist and now realistically a social scientist. I still hope you find our perspective interesting and useful, as I'm learning just so much by being here. So I'm here representing a center called the Access to Knowledge for Development Center, and an initiative of our center called the MENA Observatory on Responsible AI and Catalyzing Inclusive or Feminist AI. We are based at the Unsi Sawiris School of Business at the American University in Cairo. And we're a regional hub. We do impact-oriented research on the role of knowledge, innovation, new technologies, and so forth in development. We adopt a gendered lens across all our work. Specifically relevant to our work is that over the past decade, we've been doing a lot of research on data governance, data for development, and new technologies in the region. And what have we found are the problems for MENA? So MENA, like a lot of the rest of the world, has seen a rapid proliferation of new technologies and digitization, and this has been made much faster and pronounced by the pandemic. While this, like we all know, creates opportunities in areas like health and work and so forth, it can, like Aya so nicely illustrated, exacerbate and amplify a lot of the inequalities and issues that disadvantage women in reality. If we focus on technology, for example, we see that women in MENA face a significant gendered digital divide. Women in the region are 12% less likely than men, for example, to use the internet. And the region ranks second just after sub-Saharan Africa in terms of gender disparities with regards to internet access. While women in MENA make up a significant percentage of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics graduates, so up to 57%, which is actually much higher than the global average of 35%, we find that women are underrepresented in the workplace and in the development and deployment of AI. Why? A lot of things go into this. Social norms, taboos, the lack of affordable childcare are just to name a few. So what we know is that from our work, and what I think is apparent in what Aya mentioned, is that technologies are not neutral. The rapid introduction of a technology like AI serves to amplify offline realities. And in every component of the AI, in data, in algorithms, in infrastructure, and in the people who are developing them. Yeah, so if I just speak briefly about data, for example, specifically. Data is a key building block of AI, and the systems are trained on data that reflects the inequalities that women face. Because a lot of women in MENA work, for example, informally. Women are underbanked, they do not have property in their name, and so they just don't make it to the traditional data sets. The algorithms, like Aya so nicely illustrated, reinforce gender biases, especially because of those who develop them. 78% of AI developers are men in Western-based contexts. So this means that our problem here basically is women are absent in the data, in the algorithm development and making, and so they are absent in the outcomes.
Samar, before we talk with you about your theory about how we can fix AI today, let's, if you can give us your perspective about what explains these inequalities, why there are more men already in the development, more men vocal and present in the digital space, less women with access to the internet, let alone being present and having their own content and voices out and their narratives out. How can we explain that before we jump to how we can solve it?
Sure. I'm going to speak in English, and I apologize ahead to the translator because I might use a bit of dense words, so apologies. Thanks, everyone. I appreciate you inviting me and being here. I think it's interesting that you bring up this topic because a lot of my practice is around quantum craft, which is kaleidoscopic intelligence, which is not only artificial intelligence, but what is intelligence is, and how can you look at it through the context of several intelligence, which is ancestral, artisanal, ecological, as well as artificial, which I'll go through later. But the reason why I highlight this is because inadvertently, although a lot of these systems are built through a patriarchal lens and the data is completely skewed, I operate in the cracks, and that's what I sort of a lot of my labs teaches people how to be insurgent and operating in the cracks without having to be coders. Because my background is as an artist, designer, theorist and strategist. It's less about how you operate it, but it's the mindset and what you know and how you can sort of work with these systems. The reason why there is inequality is because there is also a completely skewed perspective in how we're looking at this. I think a better question would be a lot of the institutions that we're talking about and we're trying to sort of impact are institutions that are resolutely patriarchal, which are very colonial. Most of the feminist discourse, that's Western discourse, is trying to sort of make a seat on the table for the feminine voice or try to be equal. For me, it's less about creating a seat on the table or sort of trying to enter this discourse or these systems that are completely domesticated to the point where they operate like machine, where women are the opposite of operating like machines. To me, it's about not making a seat on the table. How do you create completely new tables to make these systems look completely archaic. When you look into a lot of how these systems are programmed and how even the pattern recognition and why most women are not intuitively inclined to use them more often, because we operate in a very kaleidoscopic way. We have always been much more sophisticated than AI in pattern recognition. We are the queens of code switching. When I talk about code switching, meaning we can sort of go from, the street to the kitchen to the boardroom like that. We can sort of really have a much more sort of nuanced and articulated way in terms of working with our hands, which is an intelligence that no artificial intelligence can replicate. And also, to add to that context, we're able to also have a more sort of connection to our elders. Like a lot of our stories are from storytelling and also from oral storytelling. So a lot of the data that sort of train our brain, because our brain, kind of works very similar to a neural network, is through this matriarchal sort of background. So to me, I'm interested more when women are operating with these systems is actually training these systems to amplify the other intelligence that most people are going to recognize, because this is what I always sort of fight against. It's mostly this epistemological violence, which is, to me, is when you kind of think of one knowledge system being more superior, that is a form of violence. Just like erasure, that's like erasing story. It's the knowledge that's being violent. And this is the type of knowledge, including, several Black feminist discourse, like Black feminist intersectionality, or we look into indigenous feminist land care. All these are forms of intelligence that are much more sophisticated, that not only those people are using those AI systems to amplify their particular way of knowing versus the other way around. So when we talk about why is it unfair, I think because in the Arab world, most women that already have this really rich way of knowing are not interested. I think it's making them interested in sort of utilizing the system to their advantage, and also finding ways that they can use it to amplify their way of doing and that particular discourse.
I always wondered if these models are working on past knowledge, and the journalism is really about what's happening now and what's going to happen. The solutions around AI, now that you understood that it's already based on biases, that it's not inclusive, and it's based in a way on the past. The minute it happened, it's the past. So how can we fix AI to be more inclusive, more really generative and more creative, probably?
Well, that's the question of the hour, isn't it? How to fix AI. I believe we need to ask ourselves first, do we need AI in journalism in some ways? I think that's a question worth asking, because I see so many people, like you said in the beginning, journalists that are using AI, but not to gather like knowledge, but to just maybe read through their texts or correct them or structure them in a way. And I think that is completely fine. That doesn't need to change. But if we really understand and look at the data sets, everything is based on historical data sets, like data sets that may not have been cleaned. And when I say cleaned, I say like checked for biases, or checked for like from which time period is this, which context is here. And I think when we start somewhere, we should start there. And it's very difficult, very, very difficult. I've talked to a lot of data workers that are also protesting right now in Germany. Like what needs to change? And I think some of it starts with, like, first of all, paying them in a way that is sustainable for them, that is human friendly. And then also like, who is who is the data worker in itself? Like, where are they from? Because that is also very important. I'm not sure if you're familiar with how data workers work, but basically what their work is, for example, they're being, or something that you all know probably, on any platform, when you're asked, are you a human? And then you're supposed to like click on some squares that are maybe cars, or I don't know, like click on the hose. Those things basically are what a data worker also does. They are trying to say, this is A and this is B. And then they're confronted by these decisions day in and day out. And sometimes even you guys are data workers. You work for free though. Like these type of questions, they're being asked and actually used. So in some of the ways, like AI development or machine learning development for cars, for example, the specific info that you guys are giving, maybe like saying this is a car and this is a human, this is basically how we train AI sometimes.
And also what we give to as information to AI when we're uploading a whole research, for example.
Of course. Thank you so much for mentioning that. I'm an author myself, and I do not want my book to be used in those data sets from OpenAI. And they have admitted openly that they have taken this illegally from websites. I'm not going to name them, but I'm sure some of you know, where you can download books and ebooks and whatnot. And there has been a landmark like decision these past weeks where OpenAI, or I don't know, was it Google? I'm not sure anymore, where they had to pay a huge fine to make up for these authorship complaints. And I love that. That's the direction we need to go in, but it's unfortunately not enough. Like when you look at the profits those tech giants are making, this was literally a drop in the ocean. But just having this decision is actually helpful for every other decision being made in the courtrooms, because they can say, hey, Google once had to pay this fine. Why not here? Why not again? Why not more?
Ruwaida, whenever I'm hosting a panel about AI, I always feel that AI in the West is there and we are still like fact-checking. We are still in the basics of fact-checking. Now with the deep fake, for example, there was a European country, I think it's the Netherlands or Denmark, I'm not sure anymore, that decreed a law for giving every citizen intellectual property for their own image and voice. Do you feel that in the Arab world, there are laws that are urgently needed to be discussed and decreed to help us protect female voices online and protect narratives?
بالتأكيد يعني بطبيعة الحال، ولكن أنا أرى بأن هذا لن يحدث إلا إن بدأت النساء بالحديث عن هذا الأمر يعني وتكاتفن من أجل الوصول لهذه النقطة. ومع الأسف الشديد يعني حتى هذه اللحظة أنا أرى بأنه لا يتم الحديث بكثرة عن مخاطر التزييف العميق ضمن سياقنا العربي. وأريد أن أشير إلى شيء آخر، الغرب دائما ينظر لنا كعرب على أننا كتلة واحدة، ويتناسى بأن هناك سياقات مختلفة، كل دولة لها حساسيات، مواضيع محددة، لباس معين. يعني مثلا لدينا في ليبيا لن تري امرأة ترتدي تنورة قصيرة، فإن تم مثلا على سبيل المثال تزييف صورة لامرأة ورأيناها ترتدي تنورة قصيرة في سياقنا الليبي الحساس، هذا يمكن أن يسيء لها. مع الأسف الشديد أنا أقول ذلك. فمع الأسف الشديد حين كنا مثلا نعمل على تقديم بلاغات لفيسبوك حول محتوى سياسيات مؤثرات ليبيات، تم تعديل صور لهن ليبدين وكأنهن يرتدين ملابس ليس بإمكاني أن أقول يعني ملابس لا تتماشى مع الثقافة الليبية. فيسبوك كان يتجاهل هذه التبليغات ببساطة لأنها يعني لا تمثل محتوى جنسي صريح. فلماذا نعمل على حجب هذه الصور؟ هم لا يعرفون سياقاتنا. فالحديث عن السياق والحديث عن سياق كل دولة هو أمر ضروري في الوقت الحالي، وهو الأمر على فكرة الذي دفعنا لتطوير أداة Her Context، والتي يعني نتمنى ونأمل يعني العام القادم أن تكون جزء من موقع هي تتحقق شي تشيكس. يعني أنا أذكر بأنه قد انتشر ادعاء لدينا في ليبيا يرتبط بمؤثرة عراقية. هذه المؤثرة العراقية قيل بأنها تحتضن خطيبها في شارع ليبي، وكانت ترتدي ملابس أيضا أذكر مرة أخرى خارج، يعني لا تتماشى لدينا في ليبيا مع المجتمع الليبي الذي كما سبق وأشرت له حساسيات ويعني طبيعة مجتمعية تختلف عن الدول حتى المجاورة. فعملنا على هذا الادعاء وأتتنا انتقادات. لماذا عملتم على هذا الادعاء؟ ببساطة لأن هذه المؤثرة العراقية منذ 9 أشهر تم اعتقالها بتهمة أنها تعمل على نشر الإلحاد في ليبيا وترتدي ملابس هي في الحقيقة ملابس تعبر عن عبدة الشيطان كما قيل. اعتقلتها الأجهزة الأمنية في طرابلس لمدة 9 أشهر بناء على منشورات حرضت ضدها. فبطبيعة الحال من لا يعلم السياق يشعر أن هذا الادعاء هو في الحقيقة ادعاء تافه، يعني لا ينبغي العمل عليه. لماذا عملتم على ادعاء كهذا؟ هم لا يعرفون سياقاتنا، فبطبيعة الحال بالنسبة لهم هذا الادعاء لا شيء، ولكننا لأننا نعلم ما تعرضت له هذه المؤثرة اعتقدنا أنه من الضروري أن نعمل على هذا الادعاء. ولكن سوف أعود للإجابة عن النقطة الأولى. نعم، نحن بحاجة لقوانين. هذه القوانين يعني تكتب بصياغات يذكر فيها التزييف العميق والذكاء الاصطناعي بشكل واضح وصريح. يعني لا يتم الاكتفاء مثلا بالقول بأن يعني سوف تكون هناك عقوبات ضد من يعمل يعني على تشويه النساء أو التعرض للنساء رقميا وما إلى ذلك. لا، نحن بحاجة لصياغات محددة ودقيقة فيما يتعلق بالاستخدام غير الأخلاقي مع الأسف الشديد للذكاء الاصطناعي.
Nadine, how can we build a feminist AI, to be honest? Now, maybe to the Arab region, or should we think immediately global?
That's a very important question. Again, thank you so much to my fellow panelists. You make my job much easier. So what we see as the solution, or like how to try and go about this, is definitely yes, on the policy level and also on the applied AI level. So what we're talking about and what's going on the international regulatory agendas, as well as some efforts by countries, is this concept of responsible AI. And when we say responsible AI, we mean that it is AI that is guided by values of ethics, transparency, and accountability, and prioritizes human oversight over the technology with the aim of serving these specific communities that it is targeted at. These type of recommendations, I mean things like the UNESCO recommendations on ethics of AI or OECD principles on AI. So what we are doing, for example, I'll give you an example from our initiatives. Through the MENA Observatory on Responsible AI, through this platform, we're trying to run several activities to inform, shape, and monitor policymaking and practice related to responsible AI in MENA. So we're trying to promote grounds-up, gender-inclusive approach, to emphasize the very different local experiences, to raise awareness and connect communities. And of course, to try to bring the very different and varied voices from MENA to the global stage. We're doing this through empirical research from policy. So the examples given today would be excellent. There isn't empirical evidence or data, like we were saying, it's all old. So these type of stories would be great type of thing that we would use for policy-oriented research. We're engaging with entrepreneurs and the business community and trying, like I said, to connect the wider community of stakeholders. If I can mention very briefly, for example, one thing we're working on, talking about like measurable ways to hold countries and community and stakeholders accountable, is something like the Global Index on Responsible AI. So this is a new index. And it's developed, the reason why it was developed mostly actually by countries from the global south and South Africa, is that there is very little data on the actual adoption and implementation of these concepts like responsible AI, beyond like governments committing to national AI strategies or things like that. So what we're trying to do, our center is leading, the observatory is leading the MENA effort to collect empirical data from 12 MENA countries. And we're trying to, the index tries to set forth like measurable benchmarks to track progress and try and hold governments accountable and other stakeholders as well. Within our work on the Catalyzing Inclusive AI or the Feminist AI initiative, this is one where we're trying to basically support pilots and prototypes and ideas for projects that adopt technology or use AI in a way that tries to challenge the Western-centric, male-dominated model. The teams that we're trying to find and work together with, and we've already done this, I'll give you an example of 2 teams we've supported before, are very aware of the structural inequalities and the biases that AI can amplify. The technologies we're hoping to support here are collaborative, so they're community-driven in their development. They engage beneficiaries, and they expand who is developing the technology, basically. We want to engage women, and we want to engage women and men in their teams if they would like, from MENA. I know this is on a very small scale, but there has to be some change, and we're trying to support this change from the grounds up. So this can be in any area: social security for women, health, safety of women, of course, online, in public places, in journalism, and so forth. Let me just tell you very briefly, if I have a minute, on the 2 teams we've supported in previous research like this, just to illustrate an example. One of these teams was a team from Egypt, and they were working on a generative AI-based tutoring system to support community schools in Upper Egypt. So in Upper Egypt is an area that is resource poor. It's nothing like Cairo and that sort of urban area and the resources that they have. So this here was the team worked on a platform, they worked on a prototype that combines the expertise of teachers with AI technologies to enhance the educational experience in these underprivileged schools. These are community schools where 80% of the students are girls. Another example, perhaps relevant to the audience here, was a team who worked on feminist data and feminist AI tools. They worked on a paper where they presented a feminist approach to evaluate Arabic language datasets with a specific focus on, advancing the Arabic language. They developed a feminist data code book to evaluate the data sets for the social context and power dynamics. So they're hoping that this could be useful for other researchers to evaluate data sets in a way that corrects for the biases that women face. So these are just like small initiatives, small efforts, but we hope that they could make somehow a change.
Yeah, for anyone who's looking for extra jobs, I feel like I want to tell you that there are all the time a lot of part-time hybrid jobs about, probably that's the data worker kind of ads. If you are interested in fact-checking and talking to AI and prompting AI, you don't need to be an engineer. Sometimes you just need to be someone that they talk to, teach. And maybe, as Samar said, we need more women involved in this so that they can have a more women way of thinking and not just patriarchal and male. Samar, from your experience in Summer Ritual, what could be initiatives and solutions that are needed today and that could be useful today to enhance women and female narrative and feminist narrative in the digital space and AI specifically?
I think, a good case study, I encourage you to check out my Future Ancestors series, which is one way to sort of center feminist perspective. Because when I talk about transcultural intelligence and the idea of knowledge multiplicity, it's about understanding very holistically that the myth of individual genius doesn't exist. Some of my artistic practice, I've been in like 5 panels in the past 2 weeks. So from contemporary art to UN policy to gold and at Vincenza, and very divergent topic. But this is exactly the form of practice that is feminist AI. And I was talking AI and all of them through those contexts. And the reason why I say I do that or I did that, because of the kaleidoscopic intelligence. And I'm not unique in it. There is not because I'm individually genius. Each of us have that capability because of our particular capacity as women. What I really want to encourage is understanding more or less that a lot of the data, when we participate in these systems, we're also training the data. I'm not against us putting data out there. On the contrary, I want to sort of put as much data out there. I've generated, when I first started working with these systems, almost 70,000 images, because I'm very interested in the representation of images, and because that is also a very big form of distortion and sort of stereotype and violation. And to me, I did that not because I want to generate 50,000 images, knowing the footprint, the carbon footprint of what that might look like, but I did that because to understand the narrative of how it's trained, because I'm using data as an artist, as somebody similar to clay, not like an engineer, which basically equates a word with a set of archetypes. And if you want to combat or sort of be an insurgent in working with these systems, you need to understand if you don't want the archetypical outcome, if you want to put, for instance, and I did an example with Hello Kitty, just very simple. I put Hello Kitty in a stereotypical Palestinian outfit, for example. You know, the outcome would be a Hello Kitty with sort of a gun. I did similar work with
the trees, to be honest. That's the first thing that jumped to my mind.
Yeah, and I did that with multiple sort of, places from the MENA, and you have a similar system. But also the archetypical imagery is typically very canonized through the Western eugenic adjacent lens, which also describe beauty as a very particular type of beauty. I'm not interested in this type of beauty. I'm interested in what people might call ugly or imperfect or mutated, because again, I'm not sort of utilizing the same patriarchal language and definition of what that might look like beauty. So you need to understand that in order to use the words accordingly. Because if you use the words according to the engineer who are male dominant, who would equate, for instance, the fabric tulle to princess, and you don't want to have an image of a princess, or you don't want sort of, if you put an Arab, a ballet dancer, or woman in a hijab, because that's your stereotype, then you need to understand the type of language you need to use, and you need articularity intelligence. You also need to input your own data, and you need to sort of go down the rabbit hole and do a lot of iteration, and that demands a type of rigor and a type of intelligence that's very feminist-centric, and women would excel in it if they really adopt it.